Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. With us today, we have Alexis Sicherman. Got it. Sicherman. Alexis Sicherman. Thanks for coming on the show. She is a powerlifter and she's also a nurse. So very good powerlifter. She's also a powerlifting coach as well in the Nashville area. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And Paul with me as the third week in a row. You're not off the team yet. You're not fired, so that's good.
I'm waiting for it.
You're switching it up. Like you changed the mustache look and everything, got a haircut, so it's like a different person. So I can't obviously fire you yet. It's like your first day on the job.
I'm just gonna keep taking androgen so my hair grows really fast and just manipulate it in different ways.
Yeah, it's not a good sign once you get there. I thought that would be the route I went, and it doesn't help out at all. Then you just shave it all.
Man, I got so much hair left. I'm stoked.
Yeah, some people are lucky with that. My family has a history of male pattern baldness, so I knew I was going down that rabbit hole eventually. I just sped it up by like 5 years, 6 years. Oh man, so the big meet this weekend, the hybrid meet is coming up. I found out yesterday that it's a 2-day meet. I thought it was just on Sunday because I messaged Hayden. I was like, hey, man, I'd like to train on Saturday. Can I come into the gym? And somebody told me it was a 2-day meet. But apparently it's what? Amateurs one day and pros the next day?
Yeah.
Who's competing in it besides it? I know Dan Bell's doing it.
Jamal.
And I know Jamal's doing it. And that's it. That's where I draw the line.
Jamal, Micah Marino's doing it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to put up something nasty. He pulled like 760 in training at 181.
Very strong kid.
His girlfriend, Steph, or I guess wife,
okay.
maybe. She's competing. And I think she won last year. Either won or came second.
Mm-hmm.
Steffi won. She came second.
Yeah, she's very strong.
Melissa's competing. Melissa Grix.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of other. John Hack is competing.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Brianni's competing.
Yeah.
So should be a good meet, man. I mean,
there's a lot of really stellar lifters lifting.
Yeah, it'll be good. Hopefully they do a good job on the live stream and everyone enjoys watching it. Like that's one of the things about taking a step up in the powerlifting way of like introducing it to people is having a good live stream, something that's easy to follow. I don't know how hard it is to do live streams, but I've seen some that were really good where they had like the lifter, the weight they're lifting, if it was a good lift, and they also had commentary throughout. Then I've seen some where they just have a video and that's it. And it's very much like a guessing game of what people are doing. Last year
was pretty good. From from like the friends that watched me lift last year, it was really good. I'm like, I see everyone getting there. I'm like, oh man, really disappointed I couldn't be there.
Especially now with the weather situation, right? Miami's looking good for everyone.
And it was minus 17 this morning.
Ooh, it was 80 when I just got home.
Wow, tough life, man.
It is. It's rough, man. I had a good sweat going on at the gym. It's been a rough week. I don't expect the winters to be in the 80s around here, but global warming, right? Climate change.
Well, in Texas, they're not really loving it so far. I have a client in Houston. He hasn't had power for 4 days.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing when you're not used to those snow storms. Everything shuts down, and you're just kind of screwed.
Well, we got 12 inches, and kids just still went to school, and they got 4. And everything closed. And
the whole state.
And they lost power. Yeah.
Yeah, Nashville got like 3 inches and the whole city's been closed. They don't know what to do with this.
No, 12 inches. That's a lot, yeah?
Yeah, it's pretty big.
I don't know much about snow.
It's intimidating.
Is it?
Do you drive in it?
Yeah. I have a lifted truck, so I can do whatever I want.
Well, you don't leave your house.
You're that guy. Good. Okay.
He's definitely that guy.
I'm definitely that guy. Yeah. I don't really leave my house much either. Like I drove 3 times last week because we were still locked down. We only the lockdown ended on Tuesday of this week. But the gym, there's only one real powerlifting gym in the city, and it opened early on Thursday. So I went in on Saturday just to lift with my buddy Stu, and it was like it was as if I was in prison and then I had no idea how to communicate with the outside world. It was so overwhelming. It was the weirdest feeling I ever. I had like weird social anxiety, but then as soon as we got to training, it was like the most fun I've had training in a really long time, and ended up getting a membership there. So I'll probably end up going there a couple times a week just to be out in public. But
yeah,
yeah,
it'll be good for you, man. Stu's coming on the podcast next week because
to debate.
We're having a debate, yeah. So that'd be good. Canadians.
He's taking notes, eh? Like he's doing his research like heavily for that.
That's good. It's good. 2 Canadians versus an American. You guys are going
preparing himself with science.
I'm gonna mediate.
You can't do science when you had so many anecdotal things to say on the Instagram.
That's true.
So we'll see how it goes. It'll be fun. It'll be good. People like a little bit of discourse when it comes to podcasts, and
absolutely. It makes it way more fun if we disagree, and then even if we disagree after the discourse, like whatever. Yeah, both ways have worked. I find it's always good to have disagreements where both parties are open to communication, but not necessarily in the sense that you have to change the other person's opinion, right? The idea of having a disagreement isn't the idea of changing the other person's opinion. It's being able to eloquently express yours so the other person can build either empathy or compassion for it, right? And I think a lot of people are trying to win arguments more so than presenting topics in a way that is conceptual and people can learn from it, which, you know, I think we do a decent job of that. I think so too. And I mean, even on the most basic level, you look at every all-time world record that's ever been set in this sport. No two people train the exact same way.
Right.
I think that's in and of itself as anecdotal evidence should serve that there's a lot of roads to Rome, and your way might not be the most evidence-based, but if it works, there's a reason for it. You might not understand what that reason is.
Right.
But if there's discussion.
Yeah, like Stu said, he brought up a good point. Like most science, most research is 8 to 10 years, past what the anecdotes are doing, what they're going to learn in 8 to 10 years is what people are doing right now. And I feel like it might be even more disconnected now because a lot of researchers are creating a business for themselves and they're not really asking practitioners what they're doing anymore. They're just doing research studies based on things that will prove some of their biases more so than doing research, trying to create a change in the industry in terms of like creating research that actually makes sense that coaches are doing, right? I think the idea of research is asking coaches what you're doing, what do you want to learn, what are some of the things that you're trying to figure out, what are some of the new stuff that you're doing that you're seeing success with, and then you get all those answers and then you build research to do that. But there's some researchers who only flesh out ideas for other researchers. They don't do research for the layperson or the coach or the athlete, which I think is extremely weird. But there's one professor at USF that said that. He's like, I just do research for other researchers. I don't do research for regular people. And I was like, what's the point, right? What's the point? Why do it, right?
Well, they do it for the money too, right? Because so who's paying for these studies? If it's through grants or maybe through private sponsorship, like there are the money influences what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So even when like a supplement company, like you look at those HMB studies that were done, those were all paid by supplement companies that made HMB.
Yeah. And they just found one of the shadiest researchers on the planet to do them. But yeah, I think Professor Campbell, he just got researched by Legion Athletics to do a placebo versus one of their stim-free fat burners. To see if it increases metabolic rate compared to the placebo, and Legion Athletics funded it and gave them the products and all that stuff. So, I mean, there's things to look for when it comes to that, right? But there are a lot of supplement companies. There are a lot of industry companies in general. Like I know Renaissance Periodization is funding that money for a lot of research. I know a lot of those guys are doing that type of stuff. So it's good. It's what's driving the industry because it's hard to get funding for, hypertrophy, strength, because we're not helping cure anything, so no. It's not like a research that's going to get well funded.
Well, it's preventative medicine, maybe if we took that a little more seriously, we wouldn't need so much research, as far as medications to cure illnesses that we can maybe prevent better.
Right, but that goes to funding too, right? Like pharma is going to fund everything. Pharma is what they have their hand in so many things. So it's like they're going to be the ones that are funding the research. And if they're funding the research, it's always going to be driven more towards medicine than,
Absolutely.
internal things that can make changes. Yeah.
For sure.
All right, let's get to some questions. We have some pretty good ones. So that is good. One, we're just kind of talking about school, so we'll just kick off with that. Is school necessary to become a great coach? Something that we're seeing a lot of nowadays is evidence-based practice coaching. And that is the idea of you're taking the science and the research and extrapolating that into kind of anecdotal experiences as well to build out an ideology of how to coach people and train people. So is school something that's necessary to be a great coach? Alexis, we'll let you go first since you are the guest this week.
Sure. So I would say yes and no. Now, from my perspective, like I have a background in nursing. So I have a bachelor's degree in nursing. I started out with like anatomy and physiology. So I have that background. And then I know how, the human body works. But as far as applying it to my coaching now, I still have to go back to like anatomy and physiology because I'm looking more so at like muscle function and how that works under a barbell. The patients I treat aren't those people. So,
right.
They're older and they have like COPD and like heart failure. So I had to kind of take my education into my own hands and apply it to actual athletes that I'm working with, so I can understand more about muscle anatomy and muscle function and how I can integrate, accessories to promote better movement under a barbell. So really, I'm learning a lot more about that now. But I mean, if you're going to take somebody that hasn't gone to any sort of college or any sort of higher education level, I would hope that, not to say that they need some sort of certification to prove that they know what they're doing, but at least have some sort of evidence of like an athlete base. Like, okay, I've worked with 10 athletes hands-on and here are their outcomes, because there's your evidence right there.
Yeah. No,
and
definitely.
then building from that point on, if you're able to take those 10 athletes and by word of mouth, they're like, this is a good coach, then those 10 athletes will bring you 10 more, so.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
So I'm torn here because I have 2 master's degrees. I have a bachelor's of kinesiology and I have 2 master's degrees, one in exercise science and one in sports management. And while my bachelor education was more so like a framework of the human body, so I had just a very good understanding of the human body as a whole and how it operates in exercise. Go to my master's degree and it kind of built on that. We didn't really get into anything specific when it came to weight training. Maybe a little bit more nuanced in terms of the physiology and stuff like that. Do I think you need to have an education in order to become a great coach? A formal education? No. Is it helpful? Absolutely. Because it just gives you a better framework from which to reference. I look at the quality of a coach in terms of education in general, so both self-taught and formal if it's there. I look at experience, so how many athletes they've worked with, what populations and for how long, and then evidence. So what are their outcomes? Just as Alexis mentioned, like if someone came to me and said, "Oh, I've worked with 10 athletes," I've been like, cool. If someone comes to me and it's like, "I've worked with 2,500 athletes," well then, okay, like let's have a conversation. You've had a lot of experience here. I would say that the majority of my education regarding training, powerlifting, sports performance came through my self-education, came through seeking knowledge outside of the classroom, But the reason I knew how to apply those principles or to understand the underlying physiology of those practices was because I had my formal education. So it definitely set me ahead. But that experience piece was the game changer. Like having a year experience working for free at the collegiate level, and then going on and pursuing that career and being in front of that many student athletes every single day, that's what allowed me to progress and to learn about, different periodization models and communication strategies and things like that. So I think when looking at building yourself up as a coach, do you need a formal education? No, it's going to set you ahead. But looking at it in terms of education as a whole, experience and evidence, you need all of those three if you want to be a great coach.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the idea of, I don't necessarily agree with the idea that if you have X amount of athletes, that makes you a good coach. I know that there's Dr. Joel Seidman, I think he's a strength and conditioning coach, so to speak, and he trains tons of people, tons of great athletes. But he's kind of an idiot, right? And, he was on a podcast talking about strength and conditioning with a real strength and conditioning coach. And he was able to kind of flat out put down everything he said, right? But he's coached hundreds, if not thousands of people. I know powerlifting coaches that kind of boisterously say, I have over 100 clients. And then you go on their Instagram and it's the same 20 they post about all the time. It's like, well, what are the other 80 doing? It's like, just because you have a big pool of people to coach, you may produce some results, right? But the other 80% of the people that you're not producing results on, that doesn't make you a good coach. So I don't necessarily think it's good to have testimonials. It's good to have something that shows that you know what you're doing in terms of the process, that you can take someone and get them stronger, so to speak. But I don't necessarily think that that's something that I would put a lot of emphasis on or credibility to in terms of what defines a good coach. I think that you do need an education, 100%, whether that's a college education or just an informal education where you're constantly trying to learn. I think college will allow you to read the research a lot better. It'll allow you to have creativity and conceptual ideas. I know a lot of people that don't have a college background in exercise science. And we talked about this last week, and they reference, 1970s Russian texts as like the God principles of how to do strength training. That's because that's what Louis Simmons referenced. And so they just took that and, so I think the idea of learning new things and being creative with your thought process is something that a college education or just an education in general can give you. And I think that's very important. I think college is a great way for people to become coaches, because if you do it correctly, if you go to the right college, you can learn and intern at the same time. And I think that would be the most valuable thing anyone can do. College will allow you to get into the doors. It'll allow you to have a better network system. Mm-hmm. And, I also think about it like in terms of what makes a good coach, or what are we defining as a coach, right? In powerlifting, do you need to have a college education to be a powerlifting coach? No, you're doing 3 lifts. You don't need a college education for that. Do you need a college education to be a strength and conditioning coach? I think because you have to have a master's.
As a professional, you have to have a master's, even for entry-level positions.
Right, and the reason is because you have to learn the biology, you have to learn the physiology of the human, because there's so many other energy demands besides just three lift patterns, right? And I think that that's extremely valuable, and the networking piece is also extremely valuable. But I think when it comes to education, it has to be done in a way where it's putting yourself out of your comfort zone, right? Like I researched what are the best colleges for exercise science and physique enhancement and powerlifting, and USF, which was completely all the way across the country for me, was one of the better ones. And that's the one I applied to, where a lot of people, they'll pick their college based on what's the most convenient, what's closest, what allows them to still live at home, right? And those aren't necessarily going to produce the best results. So I do think that in the grand scheme of things, education is the most important thing. You should always be learning. You should always be trying to educate yourself. I think college does open more doorways for that to be a possibility. I think it opens more doorways for you to have a successful career. So it just depends on what you define a coach as, whether it be an online strength coach or like a legit strength and conditioning coach. even in the private sector, right? I think there's so many more nuances that go along with being a strength coach for athletes that people need to look at other than, I coach this person or I've coached these people. Like I've coached people in the NFL and I'm an idiot. So it's like, that doesn't mean anything, right?
Don't say that about yourself.
I just got lucky. It's like you get a Ferrari and they're like, don't crash it. Like, I think I can do that. And that's really
shine that.
Right. It's like, I'm a good coach because I have all-time world record holders that want to work with me. And then all of a sudden there's still all-time world record holders. Like, well, that's not hard to do. Right. So yeah, I don't think the athletes or the plethora of athletes define the coach. I think it's like you said, Paul, it's a well-rounded collaboration of everything. Alexis, you said that too. So I think that's the biggest approach, is trying to learn and have hands-on experience at the same time. And whatever allows you to have the most amount of access to do that, which I think college would, that's the route I would go.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Anything else before we go on to the next one?
No.
Nope.
All right, Paul, next question is on you.
So I had a question about, do you need to pull from the floor to improve your deadlift? And this is coming from, so I know where this question's coming from. It's an older like multiply principle where like Louis would brag about that he never had his lifters deadlift from the floor, and then they would just show up at the meet and pull from the floor. Similar in concept to like always box squatting and then showing up to the meet and just squatting without the box. So yeah, I'll save mine. Alexis, go first. It's a one-word answer, just to preface this.
Yeah. I mean, like, you have to pull from the floor to get better at pulling from the floor.
Yeah, it's a novel concept.
Yeah. I think you might have to practice that, I mean, I guess, does this person, like you said, you have some background, like, does this person have like a back injury or like?
No, it's just he's just thinking about it from an old adage of, how Louis used to say it. And so many questions I get on a daily basis, like, well, Louis says this, or Louis used to say this, or, do I have to perform 10 times my squat max in reverse hyper volume if I want to improve?
I would hope we have evolved since that time.
For sure. And if you look at like equipped lifting, if you want to get technical about it, equipped lifting, the suit will assist you in the range from about, a couple inches off the floor to the floor, right? Because that's where the stretch is going to be. But even in that context, if you're not skilled enough to use the suit to get into the appropriate position,
absolutely,
you're not going to be able to lock out the weight.
The hardest part of being in a suit or like pulling in a suit is getting down to the bar on the floor. So, I mean,
it's also the case when you're fat like Tony.
It's very true. It's very true.
Like you're like
I'm big boned. That's the problem. It's not that I'm fat. I just have large bone structure.
Okay.
I don't think the science says that.
I debunked it right now. Anecdotally,
my
mom says I have big bones and I was just husky my whole life because of that. And that's the story that I'm going with. I think, I think Louis gets a lot of bad credit. He doesn't ever get enough good credit for the things that he does. Everything's always going to be taken out of a context with him because a lot of people, for some reason, find it to be their mission to prove him wrong all the time. And it's like, I guess it's the idea of he's one of the most popular coaches in powerlifting, which is going to create a lot of hate and animosity. But he does speak in a lot of black and whites too when he says certain things. But I think there's a lot of nuances. When I've talked to him, the one time I was up there, spent like an hour talking, and he is very much a conceptualized thinker, creative thinker. He doesn't really speak in black and whites when it comes to that. But I think sometimes when he's getting interviewed or asked questions, the black and white comments come out, and everything has to have context to it. But to the idea of not pulling from the floor, it's the idea of like, would you bench press or squat, with partial range of motion to never actually feel the weight and the weakest position that you're going to be in, right? So the bottom of a deadlift is going to be probably the least advantageous position for a lot of people. And it's all about, can you maintain, it's because it's the least advantageous for a few different reasons. One of the biggest ones is that it's going to require the most amount of flexibility and skill down there, right? So if you can't maintain your start position with the flexibility that's required, especially in the sumo position, people can be great sumo pullers and it looks really pretty from 4-inch blocks, even 2-inch blocks, even 1-inch blocks sometimes. But when you get to the floor, they can't keep their knees out. They can't keep their hips under them. They can have a lot of issues when it comes to that. So I definitely think that, you know, from the realm of specificity, I think that's always going to reign supreme in our sport. But I also think the fact that you just have to make sure that you're getting active flexibility, active and passive range of motion down there and getting really strong in those least advantageous positions. And I think that is the important thing of training those things from those positions. Now, maybe the other question would be, well, then do you go to the extreme opposite? Do you pull from such a deficit that you get really strong from the bottom position? And it's like, well, no, not that either, right? Because, you know, the thing is, for me, does the lift look the same through the variation that you're trying to use? And if you can pull from a deficit that's 1 inch and that mimics your ability to pull off the ground and it looks very similar, that may be a good variation for you. But if you go to 2-inch deficits and it doesn't look anything like your pull, then that may not be the greatest variation. And the same thing, right? If you're stiff leg pulling 4 blocks, that doesn't necessarily transfer over to you being able to be a good conventional puller from the ground. So I think there are some nuances to it. Do you have to pull from the floor year round to be a good deadlifter? Maybe in the beginning to get the technique down. But I think maybe as you progress, adding in some slight variations may not be a bad thing to do when you're further away from the meet. It's very person dependent, but just to make a long answer shorter, is just like, yeah, you have to pull from the floor.
Well, the other thing that this question kind of forgets is that these guys did dynamic effort deadlifts from the floor every week.
Right.
So they were pulling from the floor. They just may not have been pulling for max effort from the floor.
Well, take that reference out of it, right? The question was, should you pull, right?
Right, yeah. So yes, the answer is yes.
Yes.
Right. Because I mean, like you said, I don't know anyone that's not going to do the competition lift at least a couple times before the competition. And some people can get away with it, and some people have to train a year round to get really good at it. It just depends, right?
Agreed.
But yeah. Alexis, questions?
Oh, which one did we want to go with?
Whichever one you want.
Whatever tickles your fancy.
Well, okay. Self-knee wrapping do's and don'ts. Also, the second part was, I use a needle nose to help, but can't during a meet.
Okay. Can I go first?
Hey,
Please
for it,
go
big
first,
guy.
because I don't self-wrap. So
I prefer to self-wrap personally because I know that I'm going to get a consistent wrap every time and I don't have to worry about having an extra person there. I have had instances where I've had other people wrap me and it's been fine, but just in general, I try to wrap myself. So number one, if you can't use needle nose pliers, buy a toe strap from like a hardware store, like a truck toe strap, and just cut a long piece off, and you can use that to fold it in half, lay it over, and then loop your wrap through. And that allows you to use more of the wrap, as opposed to having to tie off a few inches at the end. The next piece is, when you're wrapping yourself, start early so you have some time. You don't have to rush. The next would be, always make sure to flex your quad and pull your toe up. When you're having someone else wrap you, it's really easy to remember that because you don't have to think about anything. You can just pull your toe up and walk your knee. But I've found that lifters who wrap themselves and don't have a lot of experience will leave that toe hanging down. So the calf will be in a shortened position. And then when you tack it down with the wrap, you're just a little bit more susceptible to some calf strains. And it's happened to me as well. So making sure to pull the toe up and lock the knee. The next is, have someone pre-roll your wraps for you. If you're going to be doing the wrap yourself, have someone pre-roll it. That way you don't have to waste as much energy trying to get every last bit of stretch out. It's a little bit easier. The next is going to be to have an extra wrap. So instead of just having 2, you'll have 3 in case you fuck up. Because if you're wrapping, I personally wrap 2 warm-ups and then all 3 attempts. So by the end of that third attempt, my hands might be a little bit pumped. I might make, they're better to troubleshoot, just have an extra rep prepared. After that, I would say practice a lot.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Yeah. And you had a good list there. I didn't want to interrupt.
That's okay. I was on a roll.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with everything Paul said. It's just practice, finding what rep works best for you. I think if you're lucky enough to have multiple pairs of the same reps, that can be beneficial because, like you said, just having 3 ready to go, use 1 in the warm up, re-roll it for your. Because I only do 1 in warm ups and then the 3 on the platform. Make sure you're breathing. So I usually try to time it with every revolution. I'll take a breath, I'll breathe with revolutions. But I mean, it's a practice thing. It's just very, maybe start at 12 weeks out instead of 8. And then just wrap yourself at least 4 times every session. And that way you're getting used to it. You're getting your hands kind of conditioned to it. But I've always done, if I'm rolling it up myself in training, I'll roll it up myself in the meet. I tend to like doing it that way. That way I don't have to rely on other people. And I've never heard of federations not allowing you to use needle nose. So if that's the case, like Paul said, you can do a toe strap. I've seen people use shoelaces. I've seen people use a bunch of stuff. It's just whatever you can do to loop it. When I would do it, I would just have a little bit of extra slack in the bottom and keep my hand in it. And then as I put the wrap in, I would just continue to kind of shift it through to get it as tight as possible. But yeah, I don't really think it's that complicated. Just practice it and know that the first couple times it's going to suck and you're probably going to be out of breath and your hands are going to cramp up and then you're going to think like this is going to be stupid. But I've also seen people bring handlers to the meet and their handlers are like in the back warm-up room talking to some big lifter instead of being up there wrapping the person's knees. So, and then you save money too. You fly people to the meet to handle you. I think is a ridiculous concept.
I would so fire that person.
I have 2 other tips that just came to mind. The first one is make sure you're well hydrated because your hands will cramp.
Yeah.
And that has happened to me. I couldn't almost not bench press because I couldn't open my hands. And the next is if your hands do get blown up, go to the bathroom between attempts and run your hands under cold water.
Yeah. Duffin would do that. He would get a big old like silver thing and fill with ice water and just put his hands in there. Cause even if you cut, if you cut a lot of weight, your hands tend to get swollen. Your hands and feet will get swollen once you put the weight back on, especially after squats. So being able to do that and kind of dunk your hands to get some blood out of them, to vasoconstrict them, I think that can help out a lot. So next question, Paul.
Oh, it's me again?
Yeah.
How nice.
I know. Tips for bicep pain with low bar squatting. I think you and Trevor covered this a bunch of times, but I think it bears discussing again. Go ahead.
Oh, fantastic. So with low bar squatting, a lot of people would just say, well, don't low bar squat until it's meet time and then deal with it. It's like, well, that's a stupid solution to anything. It has a lot to do with both internal and external rotation of the shoulder joint. And then it has a lot to do with how you're engaging your back musculature to hold the bar. A lot of people think about trying to shrug and pull their shoulder blades back to create a shelf. And that's going to allow the shelf to feel a little bit more pronounced and a little bit more stable, but they're not using their lats at all, right? Understanding that your shoulder blades have nothing to do with your lats being engaged. Your lats don't connect to your shoulder blades at all. They connect to your humerus. So thinking about it in terms of trying to drive your humerus down into your obliques and down to your rib cage is going to allow your lats to be activated. So I always tell lifters, think about trying to pull your pinkies down into your elbow to create as much tension there as possible, and not so much thinking about retracting your shoulder blades to create a shelf, but thinking about your lats are there and you're trying to wedge yourself in so much that nothing moves. And that'll take a lot of the stress off your biceps to begin with. And then just finding that grip that allows for better internal rotation and external rotation. So I usually do like the claw grip like that, because that's going to allow for your elbow to move a lot more freely. And if your elbow can move freely, then you're not going to put as much stress on the bicep tendon as well. And then continue to work on those movement patterns through doing like isometric holds with fully external rotation and fully internal rotation. And then also maybe trying to take them through exaggerated ranges of motion through like maybe PNF stretching or something like that. So maybe PNF stretch first, and then do isometric holds once you get that extra range of motion to kind of reinforce it. And then from there, get under the bar. Just make sure that your pecs and your lats and your triceps are all warmed up just as much. Everybody, when they do lower body stuff, they focus on lower body warm-ups and they don't really think about upper body warm-ups. So thinking about being able to do shoulder subluxation type stuff and stretching out your pec and lat and tricep, that can alleviate a lot of the stress on your bicep as well. And then also doing slow eccentric curls, whether they be with a cable or whether they be on an incline, something that's going to pull your bicep in a fully lengthened position will allow it to get stronger, will allow that tendon to get stronger, and it will also get blood to the area. So then you'll start to create that recovery process. So I tend to do that 2 times a week with higher rep ranges, nothing too crazy. Just find a weight that doesn't have pain and then just do as many reps as you can to get a good pump. And those are the things that I found to be the most beneficial. Alexis, what do you have?
So typically, because I have issues with this just on my left side, typically what I do, say before like a low bar squat session, I make sure that my pec is loosened up and that my lat is fully engaged, because I feel like my mind doesn't have a good connection with my left lat. So I have to make sure that I do some of that like PNF stretching beforehand, or I'll do like an underhand lat pull down, single arm pull down to really engage that left side. So I have a really good mind muscle connection there. And then once I'm able to, like, I want to make sure that I'm able to get under that barbell unloaded in the position where it needs to be. If I'm not able to do that yet, I'm not ready to load the barbell until like my shoulders are a little more mobile and more stable. So I make sure that's, I'm able to do that first and foremost.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Paul, bring it home.
Bring it home. So I wish I could do that with an empty bar. I spent most of my part, so this is something that I dealt with a lot, because I always squatted with my hands quite narrow, and I would like jam myself under the bar and squeeze it, like get everything in tight, because that's the only way I felt like I could find a shelf. But I think that also contributed to my inability to control that left side, which was why I have like a little bit of that bar lean. I think it was a contributing factor. So a couple of things that I've done to help. So similar to what Tony said with the isometric holds, I often use those post upper body session. So because you've already opened up the active range that you want to be able to access. So it's a bit of a neurological down regulation to get into that. So for example, get on the ground on your stomach, put your hand on a foam roller, your elbow on the ground, and then try to raise your hand off that foam roller. Like these end range isometric holds are really helpful to, number one, I've noticed decreased DOMs post workout. And number two, I don't take as long to warm up anymore, because I've already kept the range that I want to access from that previous session. So I think leveraging that post-workout period is really beneficial. The next piece is, as Tony mentioned the grip. So I usually now will start wide, and as my shoulders loosen up, I'll just bring it in narrower, but I'm not trying to force it in narrow anymore. I've also been playing with that eagle, that like pinky off grip, to try and get a better connection with my lats. But it's been feeling different, because the bar doesn't sit in the same spot on my back anymore. So it's been an adjustment to try and play with it and find what feels comfortable. But I also try to address the thoracic spine, because I think a lot of us get really tight in the T-spine. And if you are inhibited in a way that you can't achieve a good position under the barbell, your scapula aren't going to move the way that we want them to be able to set them down and to bring everything down and back. So you won't be able to engage the lats, because if your T-spine is rounded over, I know we do a video once, so it's okay. If your T-spine's rounded over and you're trying to put your hands behind your back, you're not going to be able to. Whereas if I get a little bit more extension through the thoracic spine, everything sinks down and it feels a lot better. So addressing T-spine mobility pre-squat for me has been very effective as well. So with the isometric holds post bench press training and the T-spine work pre-squat training, I can get under the bar quite well now.
Yeah, I mean, when I started lifting at Boss Barbell Club, it's like I had the worst elbow tendonitis, like to the point where I couldn't even load the plates anymore. I had to get other people to load my plates for me. And I was like, I can just deal with this my entire lifting career, or I can like try to fix it. And that's when I just started playing around with anything I could. So I think when people say that they can't do it and they always get elbow tendonitis, I think those people are just waiting until the meat's there to do low bar, which is why I think like most people should do some type of low bar squatting year round, just to make sure that everything they're doing is able to improve that position that much more. Much like, trying to find progression throughout your off season through maybe say you do a bunch of exercise variations. How do you know you're progressing to your main lift? It's like, well, do your main lift every now and then. The same thing. Like, how do you know you're progressing through all your mobility stuff and all the corrective stuff if you've never put the bar on your back to see if it's getting any better? And how do you make those adjustments? I know people that do their off season and they're doing the same 4 or 5 mobility drills day in and day out, and they have no clue if it's actually working to improve their low bar position because they don't low bar squat because it hurts their elbows and shoulders. And it's like, how are you ever going to fix it if you don't get better at it, right?
You know what? But that's something that I did for a really long time, because I would safety bar squat all off season, and then I'd go to a meet and I'd PR my squats. So I was like, fuck it. Like,
it's working,
the point?
right?
It's working. But the reality is every time I would get back into meet prep, that first squat workout would just keep getting worse and worse and worse. But what I used to do would be, say if I was using a safety bar as my main squat workout, on my deload weeks, I would low bar squat. I would comp squat. And for some reason, I got away from that. And I honestly don't remember why. But, after we had a chat about this maybe 2 episodes ago, I was like, all right, I'm going to try and low bar. And I was like, well, this feels not great. I need to be doing this more often. And so I'm going to try and do it every 3rd week, I think, just to see how it carries over. I also have access to a Buffalo bar now, which I've never had before too. So that was a good tool. I've never really had one on my back, but it was a little bit more comfortable. So just playing with it. Like I like to think of training as an iterative process too. Like if things were working, then that's great. But if you've come across things that aren't working, don't be afraid to change it.
Well, that's the thing too, is like when things are working, how many athletes, how many coaches are actually trying to think about what they could be doing better, right? It's like, well, things are working, so why would I even look at the program in the first place? And it's like, that's a good concept, but I don't know many people that are successful in life that aren't continuing to look. Like, I don't think Elon Musk is like, well, the first one was pretty good, so I don't really think we need to put much work into the next Teslas or anything, right? They're constantly trying to figure out ways. The best strength coaches are constantly trying to figure out ways to get better, right? You're always trying to find that 1-2%. Some people could argue with it, but I think if there's a way to prevent elbow and shoulder flare-ups with low bar squat, and somebody could low bar squat year round, maybe not as their primary movement, but if they have access to those ranges of motion year round, I guarantee you that not only will their squat be stronger, but their bench press would be better as well, because your shoulders are going to be so much healthier.
I'm taking notes now.
Yeah.
Bench press.
People only think about shoulder health when their shoulders are fucked up. They don't ever think about shoulder health when things are going great, right? And same thing with program. People only think about their program when it's bad. But if you're thinking about it when it's good, right? The 8 weeks, the 12 weeks that it's good may be the thing that perpetuated it being shitty for the next 6 to 8 weeks as well, right? Maybe the 10 to 12 weeks before it was good was the 10 to 12 weeks that mattered, not the 10 to 12 weeks that actually felt good, right? But people never think critically about that stuff. And that's why I always tell people, and I know people get upset. I own a business where I coach people, but I always tell people, just coach yourself. It's like, just coach yourself. You listen to your body, you pick exercises that work, you find out what works for you, you pick stuff that doesn't feel good. You have to be self-critical. You have to learn how to do that within yourself. But I know coaches get mad when I say that, and they'll text people and be like, why is Tony telling you to not have a coach? And it's like, well, because people do better when they don't have coaches sometimes, right? And I think it's important to look at that aspect of things, right?
I think there's a lot of value to coaching yourself, and like I coached myself for the majority of my powerlifting career, but I wouldn't have learned as much as I had if I hadn't coached myself. There is value in having a coach, maybe when there's certain things going on that you just want to offload the stress. But
if you can, both of you guys, since you guys have coaches, I've never had a powerlifting coach. I had one, Brian, in my very first meet, and I was like 3 or 4 weeks in, I was like, I don't really think I should be lifting 3 times a week. I'm going to go to 4. And from then on, I was like, I'll just coach myself because I probably won't listen to a coach anyways. But so what do you guys think, honestly? What's the one thing that a coach does for you that's worth having a coach that you can't do yourself?
So I'll go first. So for me, my first coach was Chad Wesley Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just hit a big total. It was my first big total, my first all-time list. I was like, all right, I'm going to take this seriously now. I need a coach. That was literally my rationale.
Right.
Okay. Within 6 weeks, I needed knee surgery.
Nice.
So I was like, sick. This worked out super awesome. And then my second coach was John Bird. So Brian helped me a little bit with my knee rehab, and then I worked with John Bird. And the reason I worked with John was I was writing for Brian's site, and I wanted to learn more about his system. So why not just be coached by someone who coaches within his system?
That I can get behind that. Sure.
Yeah. And you know what? I hit another big total with John. I totaled 1960 with him. And then I tore my pec before the Arnold, and then kind of wanted to do my own thing again. And I contacted Trevor when I was going through my divorce because I didn't want to think about training anymore. I wanted to train, but I didn't want to think about training. So, and then I stayed with him because we were making progress.
So we talked about this, and I'll be careful with my words because I don't want to get in trouble. But so you hired Trevor because you were stressed out.
Very, yeah.
But when we deal with nutrition clients and they're like, my life is very stressful, so I just ate chocolate. And you're like, why would you do that? If your life is stressful, doesn't it make more sense to just be on point, be on routine, to not create more stress in your life? Mm-hmm. So we don't like our nutrition clients to say those type of things, but yet that was a good excuse for you to say it.
No. So I didn't want the stress of programming for myself. It wasn't that I was doing anything wrong in training.
Right. But it's the same thing. Like, I don't want the stress. I don't want to have to deal with the stress. So I'm just going to eat instead of deal with it. It's like, well,
but I didn't do anything wrong. Like I didn't cheat on my plan. I didn't go off of plan. Like it wasn't like I was unable to control myself.
I just don't find stress to be a valid reason to hire a coach.
That's fair.
I guess you can see it like, if everything else in your life feels like it's going out of control and you want to hold on to something that you control, I can see that. Like, that's kind of what Tony, I think you're saying. Like, wouldn't you want to stay in control of that?
For me, though, having a coach mandated that I was in control because I was only going to do what he did. So then it became a controlled.
Okay.
Yeah, so my biggest issue with that is when you have a stressful environment in your life and you're like, hey, take the reins, you quit listening to your body and you quit listening to the feedback systems. So then you get fucked up. And that's why I don't like having coaches, right? Because they're not going to have the feedback system that you have. You have the best feedback system to you as a person, right? And that's your own body. So if you make a plan and you're like, man, my knee really hurts today, but your coach gave you that plan, you're going to push through. You're like, man, I really toughed this one out. My knee's killing me, but I did exactly what coach told me to do. He's going to be so proud of me when I check in at the end of the week and be like, hey, I couldn't walk for 3 days. Here's the plan. I did everything you wanted me to do. And I think as an athlete that coaches yourself, you can be like, my knee's fucked up today. I'm not going to squat. I'm going to do some corrective stuff. I'm going to see what the problem is. And then maybe I'll squat tomorrow. Right. But when you have a coach and you're like, I just don't want to think about it, you don't think about those things. And that creates a lot of the dilemma. I'm not saying you did that personally, Paul, because you're also an introspective person. There's not many introspective people in powerlifting because it's not a sport that breeds introspection a lot of times. But I think, to me, and Alexis, I'll let you share your idea of the coach paradigm as well. But if everyone's like, well, the biggest reason I want to have a coach is because we can communicate, or my favorite coach is the one I can communicate with the best and they know my body. It's like, well, that's you. That's always going to be you. You know your body the best. You communicate with yourself the best. You're always going to be your best coach. So I want to know a valid reason why you think hiring a coach would be the proper thing to do, unless you're trying to learn from their system and you think maybe their system's like this magical thing and I just need the secret answer, or B, you're just trying to be a part of their team so they tag you and stuff. Those are the only two things that I can think of that would, I guess,
or you don't know how to or you don't know how to train.
You just train hard. Like if I'm a newer lifter and I'm like in my 20s, I would just buried myself into the ground and figured it out. Like
that's the whole reason why I got a coach, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Yeah, which is fair.
Like, yeah, it's very fair. Yeah, it's a very valid point for sure to learn the ropes. But then you'll have coaches say, I don't want to work with new lifters because they don't know how to give proper feedback. It's like
working with newer lifters is probably the most fun and the most challenging, and that's how you learn the most. Yeah, honestly.
The same people that are like, I don't like working with nutrition people because they can't adhere. Well, maybe you should become a better coach and learn how to learn how to help people adhere to a diet instead of just quitting on them every time, right? So you hired a coach because you didn't know what you were doing.
Right. Yeah.
But then you have a lot of coaches who shit on athletes who hire coaches that because they don't know what they're doing. It's like, well, you should get in the gym and figure it out. And then the coach would be like, but hire me. I have 3 spots left. It's like, what?
Well, Alexis, didn't having a coach help you figure out your own body a little bit better too?
Yeah, absolutely. So like when I started, it's funny because I started with Juggernaut too. I think Kristen Dunsmore was my first actual like powerlifting coach. So whatever, we were probably following like a similar program where it was like kind of high frequency, like DUP style.
No,
that's what I was doing.
Mine was like, I think my first session was like 10 sets of 8 at 440.
Oh, okay. See, like, I think when Jordan was training with him, it was kind of like that. Yeah.
I puked. First session, it was like sick.
Gross.
Yeah, Kristen. So, yeah. Well, Chad and Kristen, they're both very, very smart.
Yeah.
So yeah, but you started working with Kristen.
Yeah, I started with her, and then like I got the gist of powerlifting, did my first meet, and then I think I started training with Steve Johnson, Forsaken Warriors, who was kind of like jailhouse programming, similar to that.
Question: you hired him, I don't know who he is, but he's not Josh Bryant. Why not just hire Josh Bryant? You wanted jailhouse programming.
I didn't know about Josh Bryant at the time. I knew about Steve because he was from Chicago. So
why'd you hire Steve then? Because he was strong, or because you thought he was a good coach?
I think just because he was strong.
That's a very common answer.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
And I still didn't know what I was doing.
Don't say that's okay, Paul.
For now, let her talk.
Don't say that's okay. That is not okay. Do not hire people because they are strong. That is one of the
I meant that's okay that she made that decision at that time with that information.
Thank you, Paul.
No, it's not. It's not okay.
But I learned from it. I learned from my experience. But yeah, I mean, so I learned his way of programming, and then I was like, you know what, we were in Florida powerlifting at that time, and I was like, I saw Charlie hired Trevor. I think we saw him at like Treasure Coast Classic, and he was like, yeah, he looks like a good coach, so he hired Trevor. And then I saw how they interacted, so then I hired Trevor. So then I was making great progress, and I was learning a lot. I was actually learning what programming was about. I was actually learning, how to communicate with athletes, and how Trevor and all of you guys put out a whole bunch of education. So it built me as an athlete, and then it also put me into a spot where, okay, I think I want to try this coaching thing. And then once I started coaching, I was like, you know what? Why am I not coaching myself? Because
great question.
Because if I want to be a good coach, shouldn't I be doing the program that I'm writing for my athletes? or something similar. Like what are my athletes feeling when I start them off at like 5x5 at like 75%? Like some of them might not be able to handle that, or I can handle it, so it just taught me so much more about how my body responds to certain training modalities, and also like you said, Tony, being able to listen to your body. So if I'm getting under the squat bar and I work up to my top set and I'm like, wow, that felt like garbage, like I can just drop down the weight and then work on some accessories that make me feel better as a lifter,
Yeah. And then you can also look back at the previous couple of weeks and be like, well, what led to this session
What did I
being
do?
bad? Right.
Exactly.
And no one's going to give you that feedback. No coach is going to do that. Most coaches would be like, oh, you probably just didn't sleep. You didn't eat. You probably just took something. You probably just did. They're always blaming you. And I'm just one to always think that, coaching yourself and learning from yourself and implementing new things is always the route to go. Valid points that you hired, well, besides the second one. But hiring Kristen just to learn things, I think is great. And then you hired Trevor because you said you appreciated the way he interacted with Charlie. I would not necessarily agree with that being a great reason to hire a coach, but it worked for you and it turned out to be good because you learned from him. I would say that there's a lot of coaches that preach about community and interactivity within their lifters, but don't necessarily elicit that type of knowledge and community outside of what they preach. So it's not something that I would be too preachy about, right? Like I wouldn't tell people look for the community, because I know coaches that build great communities. I know influencers that build huge communities, and they're horrible coaches. They're horrible people. And I would never pay them money to do anything like that. So I think to learn something to me would be the only valid reason to hire a coach. And it would be through the thought process and lens of hiring a coach to learn. And I don't even know if that is necessarily that valuable, because what are you truly learning? How much of the coach is actually taking the time out of his day to teach you stuff? Is he really going over Monday session and we're doing it this way because this is what I saw in last Monday session? Probably not, right? So are you truly learning? Are you able to expedite your learning process by just doing it yourself and, figuring it out that way? That's always the thing I think about, right? It's like Paul said, he's hired coaches and always had successful coaches. And that's probably, it's like, well, maybe you could hire Ronald McDonald and you would have hit a PR, right? Because you're just a good lifter, right? Maybe that's it, right? So
well, maybe I like the learning from piece is something that's, and it might not even be training related, right? Like, so Alexis felt like she learned how to better communicate with athletes and things by working with Trevor. In my honest opinion, that's probably one of the most valuable things you can learn as a coach, is how to communicate with people and how to get buy-in. I learn best, like I can read everything I want to read, but I learn best when I practice something that I'm interested in. So I wanted to learn more about PRI. So I hired Matt because Matt does PRI. So I worked with him for a little bit. I picked what I liked, picked what I didn't like, and then I moved on. I wanted to learn, I worked with Simon from Hybrid with my nutrition because I wanted to know how they run their nutrition system. I learned that. I'm cool with it. I'm doing my own nutrition now. I moved on. And that, that helped my business. That helped, me organize my systems and things like that. As a coach personally, this is going to be a terrible business move, but when I get the email that says, hey, I really appreciated my time working with you, but I think I have everything I need to be successful long-term. Can you please cancel my subscription? Fuck yeah, I can.
Yeah, you did your part.
I did my part. Yeah. And like working with younger lifters, like if I get a lifter, I teach them how to listen to their body. I teach them how to use RPEs. I teach them how to progress, regress, when to listen, when to back off, when to ask me if they can push forward, things like that. If I teach them that, they come to me, Paul, I think I want to go train on my own for now. Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
that,
I have Fernando. I do Fernando's programming, who does the podcast, and I did his programming leading up to this, and we worked through some injuries. And he's like, "Hey, man, what do you think about me doing my own thing after this meet?" I was like, "I think that's awesome." He's like, "Can I send you my program every 2 weeks and we can talk about it?" Yeah, of course. Why not?
I have a
right?
couple lifters like that too.
Yeah, I
Stu
think
does
it's
that with
great.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just curious. Because I'm always on the anti-coaching bandwagon, even though I coach for a living. But I just think it makes the most sense, right? It's, if you're a coach, you should coach yourself. That's just my own personal opinion.
Yeah, but if you're not a coach, then do
Who
whatever you
cares?
want. Do whatever you want.
Hire the
But I
person
will
who has
say,
the coolest haircut. Like, I don't care.
me.
Right.
So one thing I will say is that if you're not a coach and you have a coach, one thing that you should always look for is the ability to communicate with you and tell you why you're doing what you're doing. Because regardless if you're a coach or not, as an athlete in this sport especially, you will have to make adjustments for yourself. And if you don't understand the program and what the intent of the day is, or what the intent of the block is, or whatever way that you're being programmed for, if you don't understand the intent, you're not going to understand how to manipulate that based on your preparedness for that day. Like, there have been times like, okay, well, we're focusing on strength today. I can't do the required percentage for the required reps. So what's more important, the reps or the load? Do I adjust the reps or do I adjust the load? Well, if you don't know what the intent is, you don't know what decision to make.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's something that definitely bears mentioning if you are not a coach and you're looking for one.
Yeah. And I also think too, if you do hire a coach to understand that just because you learn something from that coach doesn't necessarily mean you should implement the exact program that coach runs. Because that happens a lot too, right? A lot of people hire coaches and they get under that coach, and it's like you just become a mini version of that coach and you don't have any thought process of your own. What?
I fucking hate that.
Yeah, it's the worst.
I hate it. So like, you are who you've been influenced by, right? Like that old adage of, you're the sum or the sum of the five people that you
fuck with.
Yeah, you fuck with. Good. So if I'm coached by coach A, and that's the only coach I've ever had, and I start coaching people, who the fuck am I? I'm a watered down coach A.
Right.
Whereas if you've had, we'll take you for example, you work for yourself, and you got coached by Brian briefly, then you worked with Dan and trained with him, then you worked with Jesse and trained with him, then you worked with Duffin and trained with him, and now you work on your own again. So you are, like, in terms of the 5 people that you've associated with, yourself included, you're not a watered down version of anyone. You're able to take those principles that you liked and that vibe with you from each one of those coaches to develop your own system that's flexible.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I've worked under, I think, including internships, both like along like 15, 20 coaches.
Right.
So I have a lot to pull from when I'm making my own philosophy. If you've only had one coach and then you go into coaching and that's your only experience with coaching, I think you're doing your clients a little bit of a disservice.
Yeah, unless you're just a radically free thinker, right? And
well, it's like what you said. Why not hire your coach? Like, if you're coached by Josh Bryan and then you start coaching, why not just go hire Josh Bryan?
Right.
Yeah. No, I agree. All right. Last question. Why haven't you addressed Trevor being off the team yet? And I always find these questions funny because it's like
looking for drama.
The answer to the question is, well, it's none of your business. That's why we haven't addressed it, because it's irrelevant. It's an irrelevant point. It's not, I don't understand, and maybe you guys can help me with this. I don't understand why people think that they are privy to things that go on in other people's lives just because they follow them through social media. Like, oh, I noticed you're not with your girlfriend anymore. Just curious what happened. Like, I don't know you. What do you mean?
Yeah,
I've never had lunch with you. You may have commented on my post once or twice. What do you mean? Why do you think you deserve these type of answers? So
I had a couple of those, but I think people look for drama where there is none. In this instance, Trevor was doing the podcast. We were on the website together. Trevor decided that he, wasn't able to commit to the website, and he stepped down. And the podcast is called Coach's Corner, and the website is called Coach's Corner. One is a feeder for the other one, and it just makes sense that the the two coaches that are a part of the Coaches Corner website would do the Coaches Corner podcast.
Yeah, I mean, 35 years old. I don't have time for drama.
People just want some juicy details. That's what they want. Give them a good story.
I can make something up for sure. I can do that. That's not a problem. But
Tony sexually assaulted Trevor. And
probably not far off from the truth now.
Much like Louis C.K.
Oh my God. You forced him to watch you yesterday.
Yeah. It was part of the coaching process. I do that with all my interns.
Demonstration.
Yeah. That's how I know they're committed.
Retract.
Yeah, but no, that's Paul answered it perfectly. And that's what I told the guy. I messaged him like, what exactly do you want to know? And he's like, did he get fired or did he quit? I'm like, well, never.
He was your employee.
Not his employer. Yeah. Like, he just quit. People quit. There's turnover and everything in life. Like, people think that something's a good idea and then they realize it might not be the best fit for them. It's better to leave when it's not the best fit than it is to stick around and suck the life out of everyone else, right? And it's like, there's just turnover in life. There's turnover in business. Why you feel privy to that explanation, it's fucking beyond me. I have no clue.
One thing that I think Trevor does better than anyone I've met, or most people I've ever met, is that he prioritizes what's really important to him at all times. And in this instance, he couldn't make a commitment to prioritize, what we were doing here with Coach's Corner, and that you can't get mad at a decision like that. So
no, you have to do what's best for you.
Of course.
Yep.
That's a very selfish attitude. Do what's best for you.
Do what's best
for you. The Virtue of Selfishness, Tony. That's a good book for you to read.
I've read it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I've read it. The Virtue of Selfishness. I've read a lot of Ayn Rand's books, and she's smart, but I don't necessarily agree with it all. I think that, I don't know. I guess just being in the military, having that camaraderie, understanding that you can't be a selfish human being your whole life. Life's not just about you. And that's the way that I've always lived it. And I don't necessarily think you always have to do what's best for you. I'm one of those people where if you commit to something, you do what's best for that team that you committed to until you can't do that no longer, or until you feel like you can't provide that service. If you're always just out for best number one, you're going to be a lonely person. You're going to burn a lot of bridges, and it's not really the life that I live. But some people live that life, and that's good for them, fine for them. But that's just not something that I resonate with. And that could just be, obviously it's because of my military background.
Yeah, you've been through sacrifice like time and time before. So, and that's what that is. So,
yeah, because I know once you have those people in your life, then those are the best. Like, everything else is worth fighting for. When you're just out there for yourself, you're lonely a lot, and then you just cling. And I always think about it as like, well, who creates the most turnover and who creates the most loyalty? And that's what I look at. If you have someone that's constantly bouncing around from place to place, trying to find their home, and then everyone has something not necessarily the greatest to say about that person, that's the type of person that's like, well, I'm just doing what's best for me. It's like, well, okay, see how far that gets you in life, and may get people very far, but I just don't resonate with that.
Well,
you got something against travel nurses or something?
That's
what I do.
That's part of your profession. That's in your name title. If I was to hire someone and their resume, their CV was like, I'm a nomad, I just like to travel, my expectation is like, okay, that person's going to be here for maybe 3 months, and then I'm going to never see him again.
Well, there's an old saying. It's that if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together.
Ooh, I like that. Who said it?
I have no idea.
It's a good saying.
What do you mean?
I said it.
You just said it.
I said it.
I like that one. We'll end with that. Paul, words of wisdom. Such a smart man. That's why you're on the podcast.
Yes.
Genius.
So, Paul O'Neill, genius.
Yes. Alexis, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Your insight was very valuable. It's always good to have other coaches on, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for not bullying me. I appreciate you.
He did, though. He did bully you.
Yeah, a little bit. Just a little bit.
I built the reputation. I have to uphold it now. So, but yeah. And then next week will probably be even worse when Stu's on, because we're actually going to have disagreements to talk about.
His blood pressure is going to be so high.
That'll be good.
Can't wait. It'll be good. So if you guys like the podcast, please go to iTunes. It's under Coach's Corner. Leave a review, a 5-star rating. It is greatly appreciated. Check out the companies that support the podcast, Barkin and baconandbarbells.co, Metrolife, Subject Zero Subs, and Coach's Corner University. Check those companies out. Sign up for Coach's Corner U. Buy some supplements, buy some shirts. Metrolife's free. World is great. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.